So I wrote Better with Books several years ago when my then, I think, 8-year-old daughter sort of spectacularly imploded out of school, and we decided to homeschool her for a couple of years. And I decided, instead of adhering to any formal homeschooling curriculum, to design a curriculum for her around different novels and memoirs written for kids her age, to reflect her particular experiences and her particular interests. So she's adopted from foster care. She's Black biracial. She has some issues with ADHD. She's a passionate dancer. Right now, she's taking 12 dance classes a week, and she adores animals and nature. So I sort of handpicked different novels and memoirs for kids between the ages of, say, 8 and 11, and homeschooled her with those as inspiration for her science lessons, history lessons, art, math, field trips, and things like that. The result is Better with Books. I ended up pitching and having accepted this nonfiction book for tweens and teens and parents and grandparents and teachers and librarians and therapists, and did research on 500 contemporary diverse novels and memoirs for middle schoolers and high schoolers published in the last 10 years. And so it's broken up. The book is broken into chapters, books about adoption and foster care, books about body image, books about immigration, LGBTQIA youth, books about racism and ethnicity, and various other chapters. And every chapter starts with a bit of an essay, a bit of social commentary, some interviews with best-selling authors and with kids. And I wanted to read to you a sort of shortened version of the essay that prefaces the chapter on books about nature and the environment, because this seems like a really good time to focus on that. So when I worked as a high school literature teacher, I met freshman Selena Matthews, who stood out among hundreds of my students for two reasons. One, her parents had just divorced and she lived with her father instead of her mother, as I had when I was a teen. Two, she adored nature. When I say adored, I mean she immersed herself in the natural world with a single-minded passion. She nurtured an avocado tree, amending the Virginia clay soil in her backyard with compost from her homemade pile. She grew potatoes and mashed them into cookie dough. She staffed an apple stand at the local farmer's market every week, absorbing the importance of sustainable organic produce to the health of the planet. And she read lots and lots of eco-fiction. Like I did at her age, she realized if she was going to find and save herself in the midst of domestic disturbance, she had to look deeply outside. Reading nature-themed novels was a welcome distraction from the craziness of divorce, Selena recalls. She's now a college graduate, by the way. Grief, she says, shrinks certain areas of the brain, which makes absorbing new information hard. Because I liked and was already familiar with the subject matter, she says, my brain had an easier time engaging with these stories. She began to learn about birds. She observed them in the wild and learned the species names. It made her world feel a little less out of control. I found a lot of stability, she says, in being able to list facts about birds and plants and natural phenomenon around me. She also found herself thinking about the middle grade fiction she'd read about the natural world and humans' effects on it. Books like The Magic Treehouse and the Boxcar Children's series, and Judy Moody Saves the World, about a third grader with a passion for saving the rainforest. Judy Moody reinforced for Selena that one person can make a difference. Unlike the parents in that book, though, her own parents supported her eco-consciousness by gifting her with 3 recycling bins for her birthday, and the household has been recycling ever since. My sixth grader wails about how hard it is to be a kid when it comes to environmental causes. She reads about endangered animals and threatened wetlands and beaches polluted with plastic, and she wonders how on earth she's going to save it all. Adults have all the power, she grumbles. But that's not entirely true, and we have the literature to prove it. Preteen eco-fiction, novels about the environment and our effect on it, sprout from publishers' catalogs annually, regular as daffodils. The stories most often feature a young person who feels just a little different from her peers, a kid who spots an environmental issue and figures out a way to help. And so we have Operation Redwood, in which a 12-year-old protects a redwood forest from being chopped down. We have the True Blue Scouts of Sugarman Swamp. Chip Brayburn, also 12, saves ecologically rich swampland from an amusement park developer. And we have Hoot, in which a new kid in town bands together with a barefoot boy and a tough girl, toppling plans to erect a pancake house over a burrowing owl colony. 3 years after the publication of Hoot, journalist Richard Louv released his blockbuster parenting book, The Last Child in the Woods, Saving Our Children from Nature Deficit Disorder. In it, he laments our decreased exposure to nature and our kids' fondness for staying indoors where the outlets are. He explains that in a world threatened by climate change, it's critical for adults to get outside into forests and mountains and beaches and backyard gardens and to bring our children with us. We love what we understand, he observes, and we fight to protect what we love. More than ever, he writes, building a future generation of conservationists will depend on helping children and adults fall in love with the natural world. Hiking and kayaking and mountain biking and surfing all help us to fall head over heels for the land and water around us. But even a kid growing up surrounded by skyscrapers can develop a devotion to animals and trees and plants by visiting their local parks and through the pages of a novel. In my own childhood in Los Angeles, there was a single scraggly willow under which I did homework every afternoon while watching starlings in the gutter. This was the flora and fauna of my home, a mile from LAX. I grew carrots and lettuce in my father's tiny backyard, training sweet peas and cosmos flowers on strings up the pink stucco wall. My dresser was covered with houseplants and endless experiments involving potato peels and avocado pits. All that green stuff in the middle of my cement world kept me sane. These days, library and bookstore shelves are packed with preteen novels that illustrate how kids can fight developers, polluters, and poachers while falling in love with redwood forests and burrowing owls and wild mustangs. But what about similar books for teens? In the past decade, they've become almost non-existent. Try to find a piece of teen eco-fiction published in the last decade that's not dystopian, and you'll be searching a long, long time. While preteen novels present readers with a world that can still be saved, in novels for teens, the message is often that we're too late. In dystopian teen eco-fiction, water, land, and air are toxic. Common animals have vanished. People are parched, starving, dying off. Teen protagonists struggle to survive with varying degrees of success. It's hard to fall in love with a dying planet, especially if you've been raised to play where the outlets are. If I were a teen reader now, I think I'd end up more depressed than inspired. Then again, there are teens like the 16-year-old girl Annie that I met, who blogs at Blossoms and Bullet Journals. She published a post about a teen novel called Once, set in futuristic, smog-suffocated Taipei, and full of impoverished characters who can't afford protection from pollution. Annie was not defeated, but instead driven to action. Want was a great reminder to me about why I need to do everything in my power to protect the planet, she says. And then she goes on to list action items she and her blog readers can put into practice. Action items like taking shorter showers, turning off the water when brushing your teeth, and walking to school or biking instead of driving. Annie notes that the reason the book struck her so powerfully is because it felt so eminent. Most dystopian novels, the kinds with invading aliens or a bunch of kids running around murdering each other, aren't anything close to realistic. But a world where pollution is killing people and big corporations are taking advantage of it, that's believable. Annie immediately brainstormed actions she could take to prevent the sort of environmental devastation she'd read about. And she hopes enough people will realize we need to start being more environmentally conscious so that such a ravaged world will never come to fruition. Among all these dystopian novels, then, we have Brian Doyle's 14-year-old Dave in Martin Martin. And he may strike readers as an almost unbelievable anomaly, even as Doyle insists early on that Dave's just a regular guy who's not particularly strong or athletic or brilliant in school or handsome or talented in music. Brian Doyle's Martin Martin follows 2 years in the parallel lives of Dave and a pine marten living in Oregon's Mount Hood wilderness. It's about as far from dystopian dread as a story can get. The setting is a small, diverse community of eccentric kids and adults and elk and weasel and pine martens. You've got to be kidding. I imagine most teens are saying about now, you want me to read what? But should the teens tire of dystopia, they'll find in this novel a winking wit and profound commentary on what it means to be a teenager, regardless of where you grow up and whether you have 2 legs or 4. This is not some sleepy poetic tribute to the woods. Martin Martin has the same sly wit that makes Hoot and the other kid novels so much fun. Nature bats last, after all. And in Doyle's novel, the joke is on us. He tells of a cougar that appropriates the exit ramp of a freeway. He describes mysterious evidence of 30 bobcats gathered in the forest. He narrates the story of a young skier who gets stuck upside down in a fir tree after trying to do flips, concluding it took hours to bring him down safely, during which his friends stood under him and threw peanut butter sandwiches up to him to keep him fortificated, as one of the brothers told a reporter. This type of teen eco-fiction, less dystopian and more realistic, gives kids an antidote to the turbulence they feel inside of themselves as they grow up, as well as the chaos they see outside of themselves as temperatures rise and glaciers melt and species disappear. Books such as Hoot and Martin Martin give readers role models, like-minded protagonists who found solace and purpose and wisdom and hilarity in defending the natural world. My former student, Selena, graduated from college with honors in 2017 after defending her thesis, a book of eco-poems about insects. The thesis defense was fantastic and unusual, she wrote to me. I found a giant click beetle before the meeting, and my supervisor gave me a hornet to identify. So for the first few minutes of the meeting, we discussed bugs and swapped random bug stories. She sent me her manuscript, and I spent the morning poring over poems as delicate and subtle as cricket antennae and the beetle carapaces she described. Beneath the surface of these verses, there's the story of a bewildered teen navigating her parents' divorce, taking comfort in growing a cantaloupe plant in a cookie dough tub, and sprouting potatoes whose vines covered the counters of her home. For Selena, learning facts about nature gave her a sense of control because she could label specifics in the world around her. The labeling made me feel like I understood something at a time when I didn't understand anything else about all the changes going on. Selena is representative of a cadre of young people who care passionately about the natural world. Young people like Mercy and Shatuka, whose work as environmentally friendly farmers in Nambia, with a focus on eliminating hunger and creating jobs in their community. Young people like Daria and Max, who created a clean energy plan adopted by their school that in its first year alone saved 30% in heating and electricity bills and sidestepped 103.8 tons of greenhouse gas emissions. Looking to all of them, to their commitments and their innovations, I'm full of hope about the world. And I'll finish just by saying that at the end of that chapter in Better with Books, there are 2-sentence descriptions of 50 different novels and memoirs relating to nature and the environment. So about 25 for middle school readers and 25 for high school readers. And I love young adult and middle grade fiction. So the adults in this room, please don't let those labels stop you. These books are amazing. So I'm happy to take any questions or comments or book recommendations or cute photos of people's dogs.
So do you think that that Better with Books would be a good resource for school counselors?
Absolutely. It's already being used by many school counselors for a variety of reasons. Several school counselors I interviewed several of them for the book, and so we have their insights in these pages.
Oh, great.
The whole premise of the book is that books are therapy, particular books. And so the reason I wrote Better with Books is because I started doing some research on why my child's depression and anxiety, which was so profound she couldn't handle school, began to lessen and eventually disappear. The more books we read, the happier she got. And I started researching all of these studies done in the last decade, and there are so many correlations between novels and increased compassion for self and others, and between reading for pleasure and a lessening of anxiety and depression. And so bibliotherapy is a thing, and it's getting more and more attention. So it's perfect for school counselors.
So that's what my daughter-in-law does, and I'm wondering if is there any is it part of the introduction to your book, the things that you're describing now?
Yeah, it's been a while since I looked at this book. I'm wrapping up another one, so my head is in that space, and I'll tell you about that book in a minute. There is an introduction, but as well, Sabina, there's a pretty extensive list in the back of resources and further reading, just all sorts of websites and documentaries and videos and other books and magazine and newspaper articles that people interested in bibliotherapy, particular to kids, can go and delve into. So yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
What's the best place to purchase this book?
You're local, so J. Michael's. It's in the window.
Oh, awesome. Yeah.
If you buy the one in the window, make sure they put another one in there. You can buy it.
Mom is in my Yiddish group.
Oh, that's so cool. You can buy it anywhere. It's available online everywhere, and
Okay.
all the indie bookstores as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, come on. Ask me a couple more.
I have a question, Melissa.
Yeah, Erica.
You alluded to that the genesis for this book was teaching your own daughter at home, and that you had developed lessons for her based around books. Could you talk about maybe one or two of those lessons that you developed and how you created a lesson plan about a particular subject, like, say, I don't know, my least favorite subject, mathematics, or science or something, a book that you used for this teaching purpose?
Yeah, sure. I'm trying to sift through all of the books. We read so many. I think the book that was most important to her early on in homeschooling was a book by oh my goodness, Catherine Patterson, who wrote A Bridge to Terabithia, but it wasn't that book that was so important to my kid. It was a book called The Great Jilly Hopkins, and it's about a 12-year-old who has been abandoned by her birth mother and thrown into the foster care system. And Jilly is tough talking and hard-hearted and racist and all these other sort of negative things, but it's written in a way that readers can understand exactly why she's behaving and thinking the way she is. The foster mother is a spectacular character, warm and loving and hilarious and unlike any character I've ever read. The book was so important in helping my child find her voice about her own foster care and adoption experiences. So we read it. You know, math, reaching between that book and math curriculum was really hard. So basically, I can't remember what math we were learning at the time, maybe advanced addition and subtraction or multiplication, but I know we would use different objects in the book and say, okay, so if Jilly had this many apples and this many bananas, and she was supposed to make her foster family a fruit salad, something like that. So math is not a particularly good example here, but we watched The Hunt for the Wilder People, which is a wonderful movie about a foster boy on the run with his kind of begrudging, crusty old foster father. And we looked at art done by people in the foster care system. We looked at politics. I forget the nonprofits right now. I don't think it's called Foster Youth, but there's a whole nonprofit across the country made up of foster youth who are teens, and they do a lot of legislative work and things like that to empower each other and younger kids coming up through the system. And then we looked at the history of foster care. We looked at the history of adoption, you know, all the way back, Charles Dickens and even before that. So we were able to really cross curriculums. Another book that was particularly important to probably me more than her was Catherine Applegate's The One and Only Ivan, which I think is a movie now. And it's about it's the real life story of the gorilla that was imprisoned in a mall in Tacoma for something like 27 years. And some of you may have seen this poor gorilla in this cage, but Catherine fictionalized the novel and really got to the heart of what it must feel like as an incredibly intelligent animal to be trapped with no artistic outlet until somebody hands you crayons and a piece of paper, and no hope until the protagonist sort of helps this gorilla to move to a zoo where it has a much larger place to live. And that was great fun because we did a lot of studies about Coco the gorilla who could sign, and we watched the Coco and Mr. Rogers video and talked about intelligence in primates and went to the Oregon Zoo. And don't ask me about math, I don't remember. And did lots of fun science experiments and things like that. So those were a couple of books that were really important.
Thank you, Melissa. That just sounds like such a creative and wonderful way to teach your child.
I'll tell you a secret too. I don't know what she's doing for high school next year, but I'm kind of hoping she'll want to do it again.
Yeah, really.
Don't tell her. Yeah. Other questions?
Oh, I just had a comment. I love the idea of bibliotherapy. I loved books when I was growing up, and I became a teacher later in life, and so many of my students didn't like to read. You know, they just, you know, they would come to class and say, "Did you read it?" And the others would say, "No." And so it kind of ruined our, you know, discussion. And a lot of teaching the class was, you know, helping them to get into the book. And
Yeah.
I thought I had picked some good, you know, young adult fiction, and a lot of the girls liked it, but the guys didn't like it so much. So I think it's great that you have those lists of resources for books that you know, on a wide variety of topics that that different kids would like, or different young adults. Yeah, really impressive. Thank you for your.
Yes, thank you. This is the most amazing time for children's and young adult literature. I have to tell you, you talk about boys not being into books, but there are incredible authors writing books for boys in particular right now. And I could throw out a bunch of names, and I actually feel like leaping up from my seat because I'm so excited to convey this all to you. But, you know, let's face it, up until about 10 years ago, children's and young adult literature was very white, was very middle and upper class. It seemed like most books were set in the Upper West Side in Manhattan. There was very little diversity, and people started rebelling. There's a nonprofit called We Need Diverse Books, made up of children's and young adult authors from marginalized communities. And they just kind of took hold. And there is so much diversity in Kidlit now, from protagonists in wheelchairs, and the book is not about I use a wheelchair. It's about a girl who wants to enter something like the Great British Bake Off. She loves baking and she bakes in her wheelchair, and there's no problem. Books like that. Jason Reynolds writes a lot of books about growing up Black in an urban area, I think of Chicago, with a single parent, and just on and on. And so there is a book for every type of diverse kid out there now. I am so excited.
That's great.
I'll calm down. So I'll tell you just a moment, just because I think this group will be interested. The book that I just finished recently that now is with an illustrator is a book from Macmillan, specifically for Macmillan's second imprint, which is their graphic nonfiction imprint. And it's a book for middle school students on media literacy. And it's called The Media Adventurer's Handbook, Decoding Persuasion in News, Ads, and Everyday Media. And it's all about the ways it teaches kids how to recognize real news, fake news, when they're existing in an echo chamber, when they're being blatantly manipulated, etc. It's a long book, and it's a comic book. I didn't do the illustrations because I can't draw, but I have to confess to you, it is the hardest project I have ever done. When they found me and said, would you like to write this book? I said, oh yeah, sure. It's a comic book. It'll take like a month. It's a year and a half. And I imagine there's still going to be some editing to do. It was so difficult to take those enormous concepts and to put them into little tiny speech bubbles and to be witty about it. So let's hear it for graphic novels and graphic nonfiction. It may look easy, but it's really hard.
Yeah.
Oh, Kitty, hello. So that's all I have to say. Thanks for listening.